December 4th, Sunday. I am sitting in Anne's study while Anne is preparing a broadcast for our foundational practice program that's starting in January. So, brought to you live from the studios of Dawn Mountain in Houston, Texas. We have two broadcasts going simultaneously. So, title of the talk for today, as I'm kind of continuing to marinate on it, is Connection, Sensation, Emotion, and Change. And I have a few themes that are bubbling about in my mind, and I hope they come out coherently. So it is a season wherein people start taking stock. For some reason, we have a habit in our culture of thinking about our lives as the old year ends and the new year begins. And I think people start contemplating areas that they might like to change in their lives. And I just started thinking about the whole process of change and issues of connection at this time of year as well. There's a time when we often reunite with friends and family. And I was contemplating how to bring these themes together. Connection, sensation, emotion, change. The first thing I think I want to talk about is somehow to open another channel to our experience aside from the mental cognitive that so many of us are overwhelmingly centered in. And that can occur very, very easily when we do something like practice mindfulness of the breathing. It can also occur when we actually just sit and sense our bodies, sensation. You can do something like that systematically by starting to sense the toes of your right foot and working your way up to your whole foot and your calves and chin and your upper leg, and then do the same on the left foot. And just sense your feet and legs, and then you do the same for your arms and hands, and just sense what you're experiencing. You can do that in your own time, but it can be very, very grounding. Sensation is important in terms of becoming familiar with our emotions. I'm not going to give you an extraordinarily technical definition of emotion, but most people who talk about emotion will say it has something to do with some kind of physical sensation, some kind of impact of an experience, and some directionality of action. To the extent that we are familiar and allow ourselves to experience our physical sensations, we can have a richer sense of emotion. And when it comes to a process of change, emotion is actually pretty critical. I've had people who've worked with me in therapy who will do lists of, what's the pro in favor of some kind of change and what's the con in favor of some kind of change. And if the people are particularly disconnected from their emotion, they come up with these lists and they'll read them. And I can sense and I can see also that if emotion is not connected to a list of pros and cons in our lives, there's no way of evaluating them. Even if one has 10 pluses and 2 minuses, it's like food without taste or aroma. I mean, imagine, and some people with COVID actually experience this, losing your sense of taste and losing your sense of smell and just looking at a whole bunch of colors and shapes. How do you decide what you're going to eat? Yikes. What a fate. Smell is just an aside, but it's a completely underevaluated area of our lives. But if it's absent, it's very, very disorienting. Um, Emotions are the equivalent. In my own case, and I certainly with many people that I work with, growing up in a certain environment, we may have learned all sorts of tools for modulating and moderating our emotions in order to take care of ourselves. We may have been exposed to stresses growing up and learned how to minimize the experience of those stresses in our bodies. We inadvertently may have learned how to shut down our emotional range. And we come into adulthood, and if that range of experiencing emotion has been restricted, we carry that with us. We came by it honestly, and it was a very, very useful skill to have. But moving forward, when we're contemplating something like change in our lives, it's very, very hard to have a motivation to do things differently if we don't have the juice, the aroma, the taste and smell of emotion motivating us. So it turns out emotions are not digital, some things that you switch on and off. They're much more analogical. We become perhaps ever more aware of emotion. And they take time. One of the things that most of us don't allow ourselves in the modern world is just time. Just time to be with ourselves, time to know who we are, time to know what we're feeling. Ah, I left my devil downstairs, my phone, so I could illustrate it. But our phones are incredible quality of life affectors. We now are really, our experience of self is mediated by our electronic media. And to put aside media, to put aside our computers, to put aside our TVs, and to be with ourselves and to start reflecting on our sensations and emotions, it's a kind of revolutionary act. So we come to the new year and we start considering our lives. It's a good thing. It's wonderful to reflect on our priorities. but we need to do it in a way that is productive. So many of us are besotted with feelings of self-condemnation, self-hatred, self-criticism. They're very, very deep, and they're really, really pervasive in our culture. Very, very problematic. And we don't wipe them out like schmutz on a mirror with a squeegee or just get rid of them. The first thing we need to do is to acknowledge that that's part of our whole process. As we are thinking about doing something to change ourselves, these little gremlins are for sure going to appear. It doesn't mean we don't contemplate doing something different. It's just we need to acknowledge that the moment we start thinking about change, there's a kind of invitation to self-hatred. It's part of evaluation is the possibility of judgment. So a bit of a paradox that talking about change without self-condemnation, we're talking about a continuum of responses to oneself where can we actually have a kind of balanced assessment of, I'm smoking 2 packs of cigarettes nowadays a day. I'd like to stop. It doesn't mean I'm a terrible person. It means I'm considering a particular habit I have. I eat 2 chocolate bars a day. I watch 5 hours of television in the evening. I don't exercise. I watch things on the TV that are not optimal for me. Those potato chips really get a hang on me. We've all got our favorites. Anchovies, yay! So it's interesting, if we contemplate, I want to practice meditation more. There are good ideas and good things we want to change. But how do we go about it in a way that actually optimizes the chance of success and minimizes the collateral damage? Such a wonderful question. And I keep thinking about it and keep working on it. With respect to this wonderful quote that I just love to read and think about, it's in my book, Buddhist Practice on Western Ground. It's by Clifford Geertz, who's a cultural anthropologist, but it really speaks to the way we set ourselves up with respect to our habits and changing ourselves. The Western conceptions of the person as a bounded, unique, more or less integrated motivational and cognitive universe, a dynamic center of awareness, emotion, judgment, and action, organized into a distinctive whole and set contrastively both against other such wholes and against a social and natural background, is, however incorrigible it may seem to us, a rather peculiar idea within the context of the world's cultures. It's a lot, but basically it's talking about toxic individuality. It's kind of John Wayne on his horse, riding off into the West, ready to take on the world. And if we set ourselves up as Marines, kind of wanting to storm our own biopsychosocial habit patterns, it's often doomed to failure. kind of a willpower kind of contest where if I have enough strong willpower, I will change. And if I have weak willpower, I will fail. And it turns out it's really not the most useful way of looking at things. I very, very much encourage people, if you're interested in changing yourselves, to look at this book, Changing for Good. It's by Prochaska, Norcross, and Di Clemente. What Prochaska did is, it's such an interesting, I've talked about it before, but he's a psychotherapist a psychologist who decided to study change and decided not to be invested in any particular psychological modality, but just like what worked. And he's luckily a statistician. So he just looked at people undergoing processes of change and looked at what were the actual processes involved. And it turns out it's quite complicated, that there are stages of change, but that also there are a lot of causes and conditions that support change. And this is very, very much in line with the Buddhist perspective of dependent origination, that there are causes and conditions that create things. We all are related to causes and conditions, and that we can optimize the causes and conditions. So as opposed to looking at a kind of autonomous self who's taking on the universe, we try to optimize the causes and conditions for any process of change. And to go back to connection, sensation, emotion, perhaps the first step in any process of change is actually to acknowledge what the reality currently is in a heartfelt, actually emotionally rich sense of mindful acceptance. I am smoking 2 packs of cigarettes today, and I feel like a prisoner. And to allow oneself to feel what it feels like to feel like a prisoner. Acceptance. Now, very frequently, if we haven't done a lot of work on ourselves, and what's going to immediately crop up is, I'm a terrible person for smoking 2 packs of cigarettes and feeling like and I'm a terrible person for feeling like a prisoner. This sort of self-criticism for what is. So we can acknowledge that. Okay, so there's self-criticism present. But the real issue is, I'm smoking 2 packs of cigarettes and I feel like a prisoner. Whew. It's a place where we can incorporate practice of taking and sending, Donglen. I'm aware of being a prisoner. On the inhale, may I be free of being a prisoner. On the exhale, aware of feeling like a prisoner and really sensing it. May I be free of being my addiction, feeling like a prisoner. We can tie in a generalization. All beings suffer from addictions. On the inhale, may all beings be free of their addictions. On the exhale, But then on top of that, looking at Prochaska, we become aware that there are many, many pieces to a process of change. There's social support, there's information, there's kind of benefit and risk assessment, namely, what are the benefits if I stop smoking, but what are the risks? What am I giving up when I stop smoking? In any given process of change, there is what in therapy we call ambivalence. And basically, that's just the plus side and the minus side. For example, people come into couples therapy or individual therapy and they're thinking about separating from their spouse. Spend 2 years talking about what's wrong with their spouse, but they'll never talk about why they're staying with this horrible person, which is the other side of the ambivalence. This person is terrible, but I stay, I stay, I stay. It's very, very hard. There's usually one side of the ambivalence that gets the press, and the other side doesn't, but it's actually typically the other side that we really need to understand and give attention to. I want to stay in this relationship. It's comfortable. It's easy. I don't have to talk to lawyers. There are a lot of reasons people don't want to move on to a divorce, and they're good reasons. So in any process of change, you can tell me, oh, I want to practice meditation. It's good for my body. It's good for my mind. It's good for me spiritually. I'll become liberated. Great. Tell me why you shouldn't meditate. It's so comfortable sitting on my sofa. And TV is it's so comforting. Well, let's admit it. Whatever our addiction is, whether it's sitting in nature or watching TV or chewing on potato chips or sleeping, it's comforting. It's comforting. We deserve to be comforted. It's okay. The first thing we need to do is to be able to accept all of the pieces of the puzzle. And then when we're considering change, to look at all the tools that will support change, social connections, information, understanding what we're giving up if we're going to change. If I'm going to sit for 5 minutes of meditation, my dog's going to be missing 5 minutes of me. My children will miss 5 minutes. My spouse will miss 5 minutes. How's that going to affect things? It's a big deal. And so can we look at these things with an involvement of emotion and an involvement of sensation? It will really, really be hard for me to be separated from my children for 5 minutes. That's okay. Can we acknowledge that? Maybe it's not worth it. For new parents with a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, maybe you can't do that. No blame. And just to want to give us a little break before we go into the meditation, but just say something about connection. This is a time more about connection. This is a time of year when we do reunite with friends and family, and especially family. So much of what we are talking about nowadays in our culture is politics. And people get very, very divided. But if you are with friends or especially family, I came from a very particular and peculiar set of circumstances, but it's only now striking me that, which is interesting. What we don't know, we don't know. My parents never actually talked about their childhoods, period. They never talked about life in Poland. They never uttered a word of Polish. Nothing. So I had no idea what actually they went through. And it occurs to me now, I could have asked them, but there was a kind of message that you don't even talk about this kind of thing. So I don't know about other families and other people, but if you're reuniting and if you're reuniting with older relatives, they have a lot of information. And rather than talk about politics, talk to them about the challenges they faced when they were younger. What were the challenges? What were their successes? How did they overcome things? It's a great conversation, and if you haven't had it, you may learn things that were very, very surprising. And or if you're with friends and peers and you're in a process of change, have you done something different in your life? And what supported you? Did you give up smoking? Did you start exercising? Did you stop looking at your phone? What helped you? I just made a decision. Okay. Some people say like that, and for some people, that's in fact how it works. Well, for some people, I went to a 12-step program. I talked to my friends. I talked to a therapist. I read a book. I read 15 books. I got sick and tired of being sick and tired. How did you do something that changed your life for the better? Or are you struggling with it? And what's the struggle like? It's a rich conversation. So, things to think about. Most of all, be mindful, be aware, be happy, be kind to yourselves. Really, really, it's a wonderful time of year in a way to actually reflect on everything. And then to use resources, book resources, people resources, your own inner self, most of all. What are you feeling? I feel imprisoned with my smoking. I feel like hating myself because of my smoking. Okay, we acknowledge that. And can we don't hate ourselves for hating ourselves. Can we really reflect on process of change? What will it take? What will support me? So, having said all that, we'll be back in a few minutes and do our meditation. And then after that, at 12 Central, we'll have a 45-minute opportunity for Dharma conversations. Lovely to see everybody. See you soon, I hope.